Greetings everyone, Frogman here. I'm going to do a little Lightroom tutorial, just show you the basics of how I edit photos. Not necessarily the only way, the right way, it's just the best way I figured out how to do things. First thing I do when working with a photo is I figure out my crop, and maybe I don't want my dad in this photo, so I'll bring the crop over here and get him out of the photo. But when I look at it, I feel like the photo is just weighted way to the right side, and I think I want my dad in there. He's got a neat expression on his face, and I'm okay with him being in the photo. So I figured out my crop. Next thing I want to do is correct my white balance. The way I do that is I use the white balance selector. It's this little eyedropper thing here. And it's pretty easy. Just find something that is white or gray in the main light of the photo, meaning Otis would be in the main light, whereas like the background wall would not be. So he's in the main light. So I could use like his fur here, the white patches in his fur, maybe his foot down here. I could use my dad's shirt. I think that's where I'm going to go. And basically, if you look at that grid there, you want it to be almost all the same color. You don't want any variations. So when you pick your target neutral, try to find something where the whole grid is the same color. And then you press that, and it corrects your white balance. Next, when you look in the basic panel, you've got your main adjustments that you're going to do. First thing I do is I look at my histogram, kind of see what might be going on with the photo. If I look at this, everything's weighted to the left side. That's the shadows, the blacks. So that kind of means that I underexposed this photo, which means I need to balance out this histogram a little. And to do that, I'm going to go ahead and raise my exposure. Now, the way I like to make these adjustments is I will click in the box and then use my up and down arrow keys on my keyboard. And that allows me to go in just one tiny increment at a time. And I'll just brighten it up to what I feel is correct. Just a matter of taste. I think +3 exposure is good enough. Next, you have contrast. This is very blunt, heavy-handed tool. I don't use it much, but it's good for black and white. When you really want the lights and the darks to have, a bold difference between them, it really makes lights and darks very opposite. And the problem with contrast, though, is it kills detail. I like to keep as much detail as possible. So I don't go to that contrast unless I feel I really need it. Next, you have highlights. Now, this was underexposed, so I don't really have too many highlights that I need to worry about. But if it was overexposed or I had a huge glare, I could move this highlight slider down. Like you'll see this light back here, it'll dim the light. And basically, highlights and shadows bring back detail. Highlights can bring back stuff that's overexposed. Shadows can bring back things that were underexposed. So this was underexposed, and you look at his nose has lost some detail and things like that. So I can go ahead and bump up the shadows a little bit and bring back some detail in his nose. Now the whites, this is just to increase your dynamic range to, like if you want pure whites and pure blacks in your image, you would move these two sliders. So I want a little more whites just to get that real clean white feeling. And then, do I need to bring down the blacks? Maybe just a little bit. when you bring down the blacks, that also increases saturation and kind of makes your image pop a little more. But these are fine adjustments. And the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks, if you mess with them enough, you can bring a lot of good contrast in your picture without losing detail, and then you don't have to touch the actual contrast slider. Now down here we have clarity, vibrance, and saturation. Clarity is more of a smart contrast. It can actually bring detail. Maybe your picture is a little out of focus. It can bring back detail and make like his fur really stand out. Now, I don't really need much clarity because it was a pretty sharp picture, and I don't really need it. But a lot of times, clarity is a really fun slider to mess with. You can also create some really interesting effects if you turn it all the way up. And maybe that's the effect you're going for. But I just want a nice, normal, balanced picture. Maybe I'll bring up the clarity 10. That's it. Just a little tiny bit. Vibrance is it's kind of like a smart saturation. Vibrance will, any colors that aren't very saturated, it will help those out. Like the more you do it, it'll bring them up, and you can also decrease vibrance to give it kind of a, it's like, is it black and white? Is it not? Sometimes that's a cool effect. I actually think I kind of nailed the vibrance on the picture, so I don't think I need to mess with that. Saturation, you probably know, it makes your colors more saturated, less saturated. Go all the way, it's black and white. Go all the way this way, and it's ugly. So I don't need to mess with saturation. Now, what I like to do is make sure that my subject is the focal point of my picture. Really make them stand out. And one of the things I love about Lightroom 5 is this Radial Filter tool. This is great for not just creating custom vignettes, but you can really bring focus back to your subject and kind of mute the background. And I'll show you how to do that. First, you select the Radial Filter tool here, and then it's going to start the circle in the center and go out. So I want to put a circle around Otis here, like that. And I want to affect the area outside the circle. I had invert mask checked. I'll uncheck that. If you have invert mask checked, it'll do the stuff inside the circle. If you have invert mask unchecked, it'll do the stuff outside the circle. Let's reset this. Now, I want to bring down the exposure of the stuff around Otis, just so it looks like he's really the star of the image. He's the main focal point. And if I wanted to, I could even decrease the shadows just to really mute the background and just make him really stand out. And if you feel like you have a really rough transition from outside the circle to inside the circle, you can mess with this feather, and that'll give you a smoother transition. I think 50 is just fine, and maybe I went a little overboard with darkening the background, so I'll just leave the exposure around there. And if you look at that, look at the before and after. I really just brought him out and just kind of, I don't know what I'm trying to say here. Anyway, so I did that. Next, finer things. I feel like his nose has lost some detail, and I love his nose, and I just want to bring his nose out a little bit. So I'm going to do another radial filter, start in the center of his nose. You can make as many of these radial filters as you want. and just put a circle around his nose. Make sure I have invert mask, so I'm doing the stuff inside the circle. And I'm just going to raise the exposure just a tad and raise the shadows just a tad. And maybe add a little contrast and just bring out that detail in his nose. So it's not lost in black. And then, let's see, what else do we got down here? We've got, I don't really do tone curves. I feel like the highlights, shadows, whites, and blacks do it all just fine. Next panel we got is the HSL panel, where you can mess with hue, saturation, and luminance. Hue changes color, saturation, just like how intense it is. Luminance, you can pick a specific color and either make it brighter or make it darker. So let's say this light over here, maybe I feel like that's a bit too yellowy and I feel like it's distracting. And maybe I want to decrease the saturation on that. There's a couple of ways I can do that. I can try just the yellow slider here and turn that down a bit. Or I can use this little, I don't know what the hell this thing is, a little bullseye thing. And I click on that and I bring it over to the thing I want to adjust saturation on. And I just click and hold and I go down with my mouse to desaturate, up with my mouse to saturate it. Looks like that yellow and his fur are the same thing, so it's probably not a great adjustment to do in this particular case. But I just wanted to show you how that worked. Let's see. Next we have the split toning. This is a special, like, if you want to make it look like an Instagram. I don't really use split toning much. Detail. This is an important panel. Now, to start out by default, Lightroom already sets you up with some sharpening, and that's usually fine. I'm usually pretty happy with what they do there. And they go ahead and take care of the color noise too, and that's usually okay. If you feel like there's still a bunch of color noise, then you may want to mess with this. But mainly, you need to figure out if you have any luminance noise that you need to take care of. And if you look in the background here, in the section here, and there's a little bit of noise. And all I need to do is just raise that up just a little bit, and it'll blur that noise out and just kind of make it look smoother. So that's the detail panel. You can do a lot of noise reduction with that. Next we have lens corrections. This is, I always do this just because you've got enable profile corrections. What this does is if it has your lens in the database, it will automatically correct any barrel distortion and vignetting that your lens is known to have. So if they know that your lens has a little bit of barrel distortion or pincushion distortion, it'll automatically fix that. And if it has any like softening or darkening of the edges, vignetting, then it'll fix that too. It just gives you a truer perspective of the image. So the faces and buildings, they aren't distorted or bowed. Now we don't have a problem with that in this particular photo, but you've got remove chromatic aberration. This is especially good if you got like trees in a photo and you got really fine branches. Sometimes you can get color fringing, like little purple or cyan outlines, and you can press this to go ahead and it doesn't always work perfectly, but you can remove most of it with just checking that box. Okay, so that's most of my adjustments. And then the last thing I'll do is assess my white balance. Do I feel like this image needs to be a little warmer, cooler? I think I might give it just a little bit more warmth to bring out the orange in his fur. And after all my adjustments, I think that looks pretty good. I think that's a finished photo. You look at the before and after. He doesn't have that orange color cast. His nose has been brought out. And whoops. If you look at the photo, I put that radial filter around him. If I were to get rid of that radial filter, you see that the background just really is overwhelming. So by doing that, I just really put the focus on him. And I love doing those radial filters. They're the best thing in Lightroom 5. They really are. And that's basic editing of a photo.